Real quickly, there's something I really want to bring up that actually happened last night, and I want to bring up the topic of etiquette in paranormal spaces. This is something that I've seen quite often, especially as a female investigator. And I've actually witnessed this happen in real time, not too long ago, to be honest. And this was something that actually happened last night during my paranormal investigation over at the San Fernando Mission Memory Garden and Brand Park. Now, these investigations that I do, they're open to the public, and I love seeing people there who bring their siblings, their friends, even their families. And it's really, really cool when I see families there because this is something fun that they want to do. This is them experiencing the unknown, and they get to experience that with me, and I absolutely enjoy it. I'm mainly there to have fun and also to collect data and to test the legends and lore that surround the San Fernando Valley. But what happened last night was pretty uncool. At one point during a session, I did invite someone to come up to help me with the session, and instead of helping me, they decided to hijack the entire session to promote themselves, their channel that was adult themed, and we had children in the group that shouldn't be hearing some of those things that were said. Now listen, when I do these investigations, I work really hard to set a structure and a flow. And don't get me wrong, while curiosity is very much welcome, hijacking really isn't. And there is a big difference when you're invited to participate than hijacking the entire session. And look, this isn't about ego, but it is most definitely about consent, respect, and safety. Don't get me wrong, if you want to share your knowledge and your stories, that's wonderful and that's great. But we could do that while collaborating, or you could do that while hosting your own events. Because if it's one thing that I learned in my 10 years of doing this, is this: true investigators don't have to overpower anything to be seen because they know when to listen. And with that said, my friends, always remember to stay haunted, but stay weird, and have some fucking etiquette.
Oh my goodness, this story is crazy. Have you ever had a dream that seemed to come true, or otherwise known as a premonition? Well, one of my followers, her name is Honey, sent her story in, and it blows my mind. When she was 18, she was living in Kansas with her parents, children, and younger sibling. She had a dream that reoccurred 3 times, each time getting increasingly more graphic and significant. And then by the 3rd dream, she knew who it was she was dreaming about. She'd always be walking down a road in sort of a desolate area with lots of bushes and trees all around. And then she'd come upon what looked like to be an accident up ahead with lots of flashing lights. She would approach the scene, and there were all kinds of people standing around this massive wreck. There was a car smashed, flipped up on its top in a ditch with the back of the car window shattered out, and there was a person laying in the ditch with paramedics working on him. She said she could tell it was a male in his 20s with long blonde hair and lots of tattoos all over, and very much covered in BLOOD. I have to spell it, I don't want to get in trouble. She said she'd kept pushing forward to see who it was, and when she would get to the paramedic, she would just wake up, and it was very hard for her to go back to sleep after that. So she would go and tell her mother and all about the dream and how it felt so real, like she just felt like she was there, and she just felt this inner knowing that she knew who it was, and she really wanted to find out, but she just kept waking up. And her mom would tell her, it's going to be okay, it's just a dream. But then a few months later, she had this dream again, and this time she got closer. She was able to push past the paramedic. She got a better look at him, and she was thinking the tattoos look so familiar, and his blonde hair matted now on his face by the BLOOD, and seeing his injuries even more significant, it was kind of hard to sort of make it out. And then all of a sudden she'd wake up again, and then she would go on to tell her mom about it again. Like, she was so adamant about, I knew this man, but she just couldn't place him. And then she was like, well, look, if you have the dream again, let me know. See if you can try and find out who it is. So again, a few months later, she had the dream again, and she got that much further. But this time she knelt down and she was able to brush the hair off his face. And I can't really say on here all the things she said she saw, but it was pretty gory. Like, things were missing and broken open and almost making the person unidentifiable. And it absolutely terrified her. She said she witnessed him pass away, and then the paramedics kept working on him, and they were able to bring him back to life and get him on a gurney and get him into the ambulance. She said when they had picked him up to get him on that gurney, she noticed a very familiar tattoo, and in that moment she finally knew that was her brother. He was her older brother, and his name was Richard, and she was sure now that this was him. She woke up panicking, knowing that something awful was going to happen to her brother, and it was just too real. She described just like the sensations, the sights, the smells, like she was there, and she knew that something horrible was going to happen. So she told her mom, and then her mom did reach out to him. He was living with his sister in Alaska, so the mom called to make sure everything was okay and kind of tell them what was going on, and at the moment he was fine. So 6 months have passed then again, and everything was still fine, and he's still hanging out there, living with his sister, working, all the things. But then it was his birthday, and he wanted to go out. So there were clubs around, and they went out to the clubs, and he and his friends were having a good time, but eventually he just kept getting more and more intoxicated, and they kind of wanted to go home, but he didn't. So they ended up leaving him there because he had met a couple girls and another guy that he didn't really know, but he stayed with them. And then after a while, they all kind of got in the car together to leave. And so this stranger guy that they met, who was also intoxicated, was driving the car. So this guy ran a red light, and then another vehicle full of intoxicated people with a drunk driver behind the wheel smashed into them. So the vehicle with her brother in it flipped over down an embankment and into a ditch, and her brother was ejected from the back of the car. And while the car was flipping before he was thrown out, his head was kind of out of that back window, and it was kind of crushing it as they flipped. So the paramedics get there, and he passed away a few times on the way to the hospital, but they were able to keep reviving him. They got him to the hospital and into emergency surgery. So the sister that lived in Alaska called the mother and told her about what happened, and she looked at Honey and was like, "Oh my God, your dream." And then, of course, she immediately went to Alaska to be with him, and he would slowly recover. He was in the hospital for over a year, having multiple surgeries on his face and head. And then they all decided that they wanted to move to Alaska too, to help him out, because it would be a long road to recovery. And it indeed was several years till he even had any bit of normalcy in his life. She says he is a different person now than he was back before the accident, but he is doing okay. How freaking crazy is that? Like, that would drive me insane, sort of knowing that it might happen, but not knowing exactly when. So you're just kind of always worrying about it. And then for it to actually come true, oh my God. I'm going to tag her, and she's going to be in the comments, guys. So let us know your thoughts, and has anything like that ever happened to you? It is fascinating. And if you're new here, definitely follow for more creepy story time.
I caught a ghost on camera when I lived in the Appalachian Mountains, so this video is for all y'all non-believers. I moved in with my grandmother to take care of her. She lived in a very creepy 2-story house in the woods in the Appalachian Mountains. This picture, I took this in 2015, and it was late at night. I was the only person in the house because I was getting the house ready for my grandmother to move back into. She was in the nursing home, and I hadn't actually moved in yet. Ever since I was a kid, this house absolutely terrified me in the basement because it was so dark, and there was a sailor down there that had these huge, I call them cave crickets. I've never seen one since I left that house. I don't know if it's something that's in other houses. It's this giant cricket. Anyways, it's terrifying. I took this picture just because I was proud of the progress I'd made, and I never realized there was anything in it until I started telling these stories about being from the Appalachian Mountains and having all this scary stuff happen to me.
This basement always scared me. I wasn't a paranormal investigator. I wasn't really trying to catch anything on camera. My proof was everything that I heard and the outcome of that, like the shattered glass door panel and the boots on the floor. But this basement, I mean, it's pitch black at night. I would never go down here by myself when I was a kid, but my bedroom was down there as an adult because the bedroom upstairs was tiny and it was full of my grandmother's doll collection. So you can see it looks like a pretty normal basement. There's not really anything scary going on down here. I've cleaned it up. It's nice and cozy until I pan over to the fireplace. In the shadows in this fireplace, I don't know if y'all see this immediately like I did. That is, to me, a baby or something in the form of a baby. And other people are seeing other things in the shadows here. I see a couple other things, but that's what stands out to me the most. I circled it here so that way y'all did not have trouble finding it. This is terrifying because this was in the basement with me at night in the Appalachian Mountains, and I didn't even know it. I mean, I knew that the basement was scary, but I didn't know that there were things looking at me. That baby, or whatever it is staring directly into my soul as I'm taking this picture. Y'all, what would you do if this was your house in the Appalachian Mountains?
Weird spooking dating story. Alright, I'm not entirely sure where to start with this one. I've been going back and forth about it all week. I think, though, that this needs to be told. I'm warning you now that schmooshide is mentioned in this story. Please don't read it if that triggers you. I lived with my best friend and her boyfriend for a while, and I even dated his brother for a short period. Now, I know that if you've read my stories, you've likely gone to my profile to check it out. There, I mentioned that I am a witch and a medium. I have always been able to tell when something is going to happen, whether it's good or bad. This is important, I promise. I once stopped my mom from going to a bar, and we later learned there had been both a pew-pewing and a whoop-whoop at the bar. She was planning to visit, and I'm glad I stopped her. So when I met my bestie's boyfriend's brother, I knew we would date. I knew how long the relationship would last, and I knew he would break up with me. That's never fun. Oh my gosh, that just kind of like makes you not even want to do any of it. But gosh, that sucks. Anyway, we were hanging out one night at his place with a group of people for a game night. Somehow it came out that I have Wyatt, something I used to not tell people. What's Wyatt? I don't want to end up in a white padded room. It doesn't sound very fun. Somehow, though, it was brought up and people started bombarding me with questions about ghosts and the paranormal. Please, if you ever meet me in real life, don't do that. The conversation was short lived because I am very good at changing the subject. Later that night, as we were lying in bed, my boyfriend admitted that he could see what I equated to fairies. I asked him to describe them, and what he said sounded more like will-o'-wisps than actual fairies. I tried to explain that I'd seen them before too, and that he should be careful around them. He didn't like that. What's the difference between fairies and will-o'-wisps? I thought they were like all kind of the same thing, just like different names. Interesting. Not too long after, he broke up with me in a text using words I now thoroughly despise. I can't do this anymore. What is that even supposed to mean? Anyway, back to the story. I left the life I'd begun to build behind and went back to my family. That was mostly a mistake on my part. Not long after returning home, I met my first fiance. He was well over 6 feet tall and hazel eyes. Not important. He knew from past conversations that I am a witch and that I wear a lot of black. About 3 months into dating, he proposed. I'll admit I was young and stupid when I said yes. He had conditions, though. Oh, girl, red flag. Anytime there's conditions, red flag. And that should have been a red brick thrown at my face, yes. His main condition was that I stop practicing witchcraft, which I never truly did. Okay, like I'm not into witchcraft or anything like that, but I know a lot of people like this is their religion. Like you can't tell someone to stop practicing their religion. His family were hardcore Bible thumpers. Girl, he's a walking red flag. And I needed to fit in. Ugh. We never legally married. Thank the gods. Yes, thank the gods. Thank the God. Thank whatever anyone worships. Thank them. But he did give me a son. I've never mentioned a George before. After my son's father and I split, my son began talking to someone named George. I'm fairly certain it wasn't the same George because my son described his George as an elderly gentleman. I eventually moved on and met my current and legal husband. The first thing you need to know is that he was raised Christian and stopped going to church during his teenage years. The second thing you need to know is that his best friend was my bestie's husband. Funny, right? When we met, we talked about our beliefs. I had decided I would never again date someone who wanted me to change. Funnily enough, he supports my beliefs. We've been married for 7 years and together for almost 14. Good for you. One night, we were hanging out with our besties in our shared apartment when it happened. Wyatt was behaving and not trying to freak anyone out, so it wasn't him. Wyatt. Oh, okay, I get it. Wyatt's like her spirit guide, or like the person that hangs around her in like the spirit world. Okay, now I'm getting this. My bestie's husband was out shopping, something I only learned later. I got up to fix dinner when I saw a man standing in their bedroom. Oh, hey Ryan, I said. I didn't realize you guys were home. I was just about to start cooking. He didn't respond. My bestie gave me a funny look and glanced down the hall toward their bedroom. I shrugged it off and continued what I was doing. About 10 minutes later, my husband and Ryan came through the door, laughing and carrying groceries. I stopped what I was doing and stared at them. My bestie thought it was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. I walked around the corner, separating the kitchen and the dining room, and looked back toward their room. Ryan and my husband, Matt, asked what the problem was. I pointed between Ryan and the bedroom, mouth open. You were in your room not 10 minutes ago, I said. No, he replied. I'd just seen him. He asked me to describe what I'd seen, so I did. I watched his face go pale, which for a 6-foot African American man was kind of impressive. He sat down heavily in one of the living room chairs. I had just described his cousin in great detail. His cousin had taken his own life some time earlier. They'd been very close, and Ryan had been missing him lately, especially since getting engaged to my bestie. Wyatt, being Wyatt, wanted to know why the spirit hadn't moved on, so he asked. The cousin wasn't ready. He was watching over Ryan and didn't want to leave because, as a Christian, he was afraid of going to hell for what he'd done. I hate that. I asked Ryan if his cousin could stay until he was ready to move on. Here's the thing about Ryan. He's kind, almost to a fault. He didn't hesitate. He said his cousin could stay as long as he liked. The cousin was still there when Matt and I moved to Washington 7 years ago. I'm pretty sure he's still there, though he visits us now and then. Wyatt and he have become good friends. Wyatt was told him many times that how you unalive plays no role in judgment, trying to convince him to move on. I think he's still afraid of hell, and I can't say I blame him. Being raised the way that he was, he doesn't quite believe Wyatt. I hope he'll move on eventually, but until then, he's welcome in my house and my besties for as long as he likes. For anyone afraid of that loved one who took their own lives have ended up in hell, please know that isn't necessarily true. They may still be watching over you, refusing to move on, or they may have moved on and been judged by how they lived, not by how they unalived. Some things can't be quantified. Unaliving is one of them. I was really confused on who Wyatt was. Maybe I just wasn't understanding. I don't know. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments, and if you've got a similar story, send it my way.
Let's read another true and scary story. This happened to me when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I was staying the night at my grandmother's house. I never went to my grandparents a lot, so when I did, it felt like a privilege. I had really strict adoptive parents. That house held a lot of history, though more than I understood at the time. My grandfather had passed away a few years before this happened. He died inside that house. My dad had also died when I was really young. He suffered a heart attack while driving down the highway and crashed. My mom wasn't in my life. She was in a women's psychiatric home after being involved in someone's murder. Even as a child, death and instability were already woven into my world. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal. I can usually feel when something isn't right, when the energy in a place feels off, even if nothing obvious is happening. That night, that sensitivity felt sharper than ever. My aunt and her partner lived in the house too, but they stayed in the basement. My grandmother and I were sleeping on the main floor. When everything happened, they were nowhere around. I didn't hear footsteps, doors, or anyone coming upstairs. I'm also a moderately deep sleeper. I don't wake up easily, so the fact that I woke up that night has always stood out to me. Sometime between 2:30 and 3 in the morning, I woke up suddenly from this overwhelming feeling of dread and being watched. The room felt wrong immediately. It was ice cold in a way that didn't make sense. The cold felt heavy, like it had weight to it. I remember being filled with this deep, sinking dread and completely terrified. My grandmother was asleep beside me. Her bed was positioned in front of the window. The bedroom door was in the back right corner of the room, leading out into the hallway, and it was shut. The ceilings in her house were very high, which somehow made the darkness feel more threatening. There was a small nightlight on in her bathroom, in the front right corner of the bedroom. It cast just enough light into the room to see shapes, but not enough to create something like what I saw. Standing in the corner by the closed bedroom door was a figure. It was completely black, solid, About 7 feet tall, there were no features, so not a face that I can see, and it wasn't moving. It wasn't transparent, and there wasn't enough light for it to be a shadow. I stared at it for about 10 seconds, frozen. The scariest part is that I don't know how long it had already been there. I don't know how long it had been watching me before I woke up and felt its presence. That thought still terrifies me. Eventually, my fear took over and I started screaming. It woke my grandmother up instantly. She was confused and terrified and reached for the lamp beside my bed. The second the light came on, it was gone. Nothing in the corner, no shape, no explanation. My aunt and her partner never came upstairs. No one else in the house saw anything, and no one ever truly believed me. But I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and I know the terror I experienced in that moment. I never saw it again, but I've always called it the black thing. And even now, what scares me the most isn't just that it was there, it's the thought that it may have been watching me long before I ever woke up. I'm 18 now, and this still genuinely terrifies me. I'm a witch now, and I do multiple cleansings a month. Death has impacted my life so much, and I don't want to be vulnerable anymore. My name is Jamie. Thank you so much, Jamie, for sending this in. This is so terrifying, and my first thought was like, typically when this happens, people are experiencing sleep paralysis, but you were able to scream, so that doesn't explain it. There had to have been something that happened or something in that space that woke you up, especially if you were a deep sleeper. And I wonder if whether or not you woke up because it had made a noise prior to you waking up, or if it was just the energy of its presence, whatever it is, being in the room. Either way, so horrifying, and I would also scream in this situation. Thank you again, Jamie, for sending this one in. If you guys have any stories you'd like me to read, please email them to me and I will get to them if I can, and I will see you in the next one.
A lot of people wonder why they say in the Appalachians not to go into the woods at night, not to whistle, not to sing, and always make sure you close your windows and you lock your doors, and absolutely never respond to anything that calls your name. So this goes back to an old Native American belief in the area that these mountains were home to spirits and that they would come out and wander during the night. And I've heard 2 stories that will give you an idea as to why you should not do these things at night. So there was a man named Jeff. He lived outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. And he was told about this spot up in the mountains where there was some good mushrooms. But no one would go to this area because they were very superstitious. So Jeff thinks, I'm going to go to this area and get a good haul. And, what do I care? There's no such thing as ghosts. So he goes out, he parks his car, he goes into the woods, and he's hunting for several hours. He starts to notice the sun is going down, it's getting dark, it's time to head back to his vehicle. Now, as he's walking through the woods, he all of a sudden hears, Jeff, come here. Come, Jeff. And he hears his name being called. So Jeff knows from legend that if you hear something calling your name, you do not respond. So he just keeps on walking, and all of a sudden, he hears this louder and louder, his name being called. And then he starts hearing screaming coming from deep in the woods. And he hears laughter, and he hears what sounds like people just talking all around him. So he starts walking faster and faster. And he knows the way he came in, but for some reason, it feels like the trees are almost moving, and he is going in the wrong direction now. And finally, he comes out sort of to this open area, and he sees a man standing out in this field, but he's turned around looking in the opposite direction. So Jeff goes up and approaches this guy and says, "Excuse me, sir, do you know the route back to the highway?" And when this man turns around, Jeff realizes that it's himself, and he's all bloody and bruised, and he's just staring back at him. So Jeff runs as fast as he can for several miles, gets in his car, and drives back home. Later that night, he's awoken to hearing voices inside his room calling out to him, "Jeff, come back, come." And so Jeff never went back into the woods again, mushroom hunting. And the second story I've heard is there was a couple who decided they were going to live in the Appalachian Mountains for a summer. They find this cabin for rent, and they're surprised at how cheap the price is for 6 months. So they rent this cabin, and they go out there, and they bring all their stuff to move in. And this guy in a truck, he meets them out there, and he's very nervous. And he tells them, "Hey, at night, you're going to want to lock your doors and close the blinds. And then he gets in his truck and he leaves as fast as he can. So this couple is just in awe of how nice this log cabin is and the fact that they got it from, this huge steal. So that night they go into their cabin, they make themselves comfortable. It gets dark, and all of a sudden they hear a thump, thump, thump up on the roof. And it sounds like something or someone is walking across the roof. And then they hear banging on the side of the house, and they hear these large booms and creaks and sounds coming all around them from outside. It sounds almost like their house is being invaded. Eventually, the sound dies down and daylight comes. The next day, same thing happens, and for several weeks this goes on. So finally, the husband is fed up, and he says, you know what, I'm done. We're taking our home back. We're tired of being harassed. So in the middle of the night, when this sounds start happening again, he goes to the window, he opens the curtains, and then he looks out the window, and standing out behind the window is a woman, and she has this pale, long face and white, gray hair going over her shoulders. And he notices she has solid white eyes, and she's just staring at him. And then she points directly at him, and that's when all hell breaks loose. He starts hearing banging on the roof, banging on the sides of the house. The house feels like almost like an earthquake is happening. And then he shuts the blinds. They run into the bathroom, and they hide for the rest of the night. The next day, they decide, we're through with this, and they leave, never to return again.
My daughter Christine was 5 years old. It was a hot sunny day and she was playing alone in the garden. I overheard her talking to someone. I went outside to see who it was, but there was nobody there. I was puzzled. Who are you talking to? I asked. Harry, she replied. Harry who? I asked. She shrugged her shoulders. Just Harry, she said. That evening, when my husband came home from work, I told him about it. He said it was normal for kids that age to have imaginary friends. I tried to put it out of my mind, but something about that name, Harry. The next day, Christine was playing in the garden again while I was in the kitchen. Again, I heard her talking to someone. When I looked out the window, I thought I could see a dark shadow on the grass. It looked like a person, but maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. I tapped on the window and told Christine to come inside for dinner. Can Harry come too? She asked. No, I said. Harry has to stay outside. But he's hungry, she whined. Who is Harry? I asked. He's my brother, she replied. But you don't have a brother, I told her. Yes, I do. His name's Harry. Who told you that? Harry told me. My daughter spent every day in the garden talking to her imaginary friend, and so after a while it began to worry me. I took her to see a psychiatrist. All children need friends of their own age, the psychiatrist told me. If they don't have friends, they invent them. It's a normal part of childhood. As soon as the school starts, she'll probably forget about it. Talking to the psychiatrist reassured me, but I couldn't help feeling nervous. A few days later, Christine started school. I dropped her off in the morning for her first day, kissed her on the forehead and waved goodbye, then watched as she walked up to the front door of the school and went inside. There was something I had to do. I took a bus into the city and made my way to a large grey building. It had been 4 long years since I visited the building. It was the orphanage where we adopted Christine. The woman who ran the orphanage opened the door and invited me inside. I told her that we needed to know about Christine's history. Who were her birth parents? Where were they now? Had they died? And if so, how had they died? I'm sorry, the woman said. We have strict rules about divulging such information. I told her it was very important. I begged and pleaded. I got down on my knees, and eventually the woman gave in. Christine was born into a very poor family. The children were neglected. They lived in terrible condition. One night, the mother and father got into a violent argument. The father grabbed a knife, ended up stabbing his wife to death and cut off her head. When the police arrived, it was all over. They found Christine in the garden, clutched in the arms of her brother. He'd been stabbed. They found their father and mother inside the house. The father had taken his own life. My eyes were welling up with tears. What was his name, the brother? What was his name? His name was Harry, she replied. I stumbled out of the orphanage in a daze. I wandered through the streets with no idea of where I was going. The name Harry was floating around in my brain. I felt like I was in a nightmare. I was so frightened, but I didn't know why. Then I looked at my watch. It was after 3 o'clock. I had to pick Christine up from school and I was already late. So I hopped on a bus and eventually I arrived at the school. I walked down the hallway and went into the classroom where I found the teacher gathering up her books. I'm sorry I'm late, I gasped. Where's Christine? Christine, the teacher said. She's gone. Gone? I cried, aghast. Yeah, her brother picked her up a few minutes ago. My heart sank in my chest. Without another word, I ran outside and started shouting my daughter's name. I was running down the street searching for my daughter, screaming and crying hysterically. It was no use. She was gone. I spent the next 2 weeks in bed. The police searched for Christine, but they never found any trace of her. Her picture was in the newspaper, her face on milk cartons. Everybody was looking for her, but it seemed that she'd just disappeared into thin air. After a while, people lost interest and the search was called off. It remained just another unsolved mystery. Years have passed since then, but the pain in my heart never goes away. The fear never ends. Such ordinary things make me afraid. Hot sunny days, dark shadows on grass, children with red hair, and the name Harry.
My dream led me to an insanely haunted place. I'm gonna tell you about it while I take this off. So as some of you guys know, me and my roommate, we're professional ghost hunters. But let me start with the dream. We didn't know where we were gonna ghost hunt that week. We're always finding new crazy haunted locations. I had a weird dream about this orange and yellow building. And I just remember that me and Tori were ghost hunting there and it was super haunted. So I texted Tori about the dream and she's like, thank God, hopefully we'll find it because we have no idea where to hunt this week. If you watch our channel, you know that we've been to almost every haunted location in California. We had met some podcasters on the Queen Mary and they told us about this super haunted inn in Ventura. So I was trying to find that place and I found out that it closed down permanently. But in the suggested hotels underneath, there was a photo. It was the hotel from my dream. Why was fate leading me to this place? We booked a room and went there that night. And then we found that over 6,000 people had been killed at this place. That would make this place even more haunted than the Queen Mary. We asked the spirits why they had led me to that location. They said they wanted us to let people know that it's haunted. I never thought a ghost would tell me to tell people that a location is haunted. But if you do want to see the video, it's up on our YouTube channel.
Have you ever heard the old saying, you shouldn't step or stand on a grave? Now, there was this young adult named Barry, and Barry and his friends decided they wanted to go out to the cemetery one night. Now, this cemetery was known to be haunted and there were all these stories and legends. So him and his buddies, they go to the cemetery and they're walking around with flashlights, kind of scaring each other. And he said that he was walking on the graves. And one of his friends said, hey, Barry, like, you shouldn't walk on top of the graves or stand on them. Like, it's bad luck. And Barry said, what are you talking about? Like, I don't believe in any of that. So he starts stomping on this grave and then, like, spits on it. And is like, what's going to happen to me? A ghost going to get me? So he said, you know, while they were in the cemetery, nothing really happened. So he didn't think anything of stepping on the grave or anything. Well, when he got back home, he just had kind of this bad feeling that maybe he shouldn't have done that. And so when he got to his house, he goes inside and his girlfriend is in the kitchen and she's cooking a big meal. Barry says, hey, what's up and stuff. And she goes, where'd you go? And he goes, oh, I went out to the cemetery with some of my buddies. Well, as he's talking to his girlfriend, he sees someone standing behind her. And he's like, who's behind you? And she's like, what do you mean? And he's like, do you have a guy in the house or something? Like, who's behind you? And she looks around and she's like, what are you talking about? There's no one behind me. And he said, there's a guy standing behind you. And like, she couldn't see him, but he could see this guy, like, and he was wearing a flannel and jeans and boots. And he had just this very pale, long face, this brown kind of shaggy hair, and a, longer kind of beard. And he's just standing behind his wife. And, Barry's kind of like, what's going on? Like, you don't see that? And she's like, no, I don't, or you're starting to scare me. So Barry's like, whatever. He goes out of the room. He comes back. He doesn't see the guy anymore. And so that night, right, he is laying in bed and his girlfriend's right next to him. He is just like tossing and turning because he can't really sleep because he's thinking about, what happened at the cemetery. And when he turns over towards where his girlfriend's sleeping, he sees this man, the same man he's seen behind his girlfriend. And he is in between him and his girlfriend. And he jumps out of bed and he's like, what the heck? Who are you? Who are you? What are you doing here? And his wife's like, or his girlfriend's like, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? Like, what's going on? And he's like, who's the man in the bed? And she's like, there's no man in the bed. And so, like, he walks out of the room and is like, I can't handle this. He comes back into the room to apologize to his girlfriend and check to see if that he can still see this guy, and the guy's not in there. And for like weeks, he was like seeing this guy standing behind his girlfriend. And so he said he got in his car one night, he drove to the cemetery, and he went back to that grave that he had stomped on, and he apologized and was like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disrespect you, and like, I hope you can forgive me and leave me alone. And he said, like, all of a sudden he just got this overwhelming feeling like everything was going to be okay. And he went back home and he didn't see this guy anymore.
You can't make this stuff up. Might have known the story of real life boogeyman.
I absolutely love the story of this staircase and the mystery behind it. When the Loreto Chapel in New Mexico was finished in 1878, they had a huge problem. They had a choir loft up there, but no way to reach it. The Sisters of the Chapel called many carpenters, but all of them said that this loft was going to have to be accessed via ladder because there was just no way to put in a spiral staircase or a staircase of any kind. They said that it would interfere with the interior space of this chapel and it just wouldn't work. So the sisters decided that they were going to spend the next 9 days praying to Saint Joseph, who was the patron saint of carpenters. On the 9th day of their prayers, which was the last day, a man with a toolbox and a donkey showed up at the chapel. He was looking for work, so the sisters gave him this job. After several months of work, the staircase was done, and the man simply vanished. He didn't take any payment. He didn't tell the sisters who he was. He just kind of disappeared. The sisters wanted to know who he was to pay him, and he just, like I said, vanished. He was just gone. They even took out an ad in the paper to see if anyone knew who he was, but nobody did. Eventually, they concluded that this was Saint Joseph himself, that he had come to build them this beautiful, absolutely elegant staircase. But the mystery doesn't end here. The strangest part about this staircase is how there is no support beam that goes through the middle of the staircase. The carpenter also didn't use nails or glue to keep it steady. This was simply built using wooden pegs. Like, the actual idea of this doesn't even really make sense to me. I'm not a carpenter, nor do I know how to do any of this, but it still feels like there should be something to support it. And to this day, no one knows the carpenter who built this. So what are your thoughts on this? Did Saint Joseph actually come and build this for the sisters, or was it just a kind stranger? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments and follow for more things.
Spirits knock for a couple of different reasons. A lot of times it's that they are trying to communicate. You see, spirits sometimes don't have the energy to just materialize and appear and talk to you, right? But it may have enough energy to make a noise. And a lot of times when this happens, you want to pay attention because it's often trying to show you something. Some people actually believe that these spirits, right, are sort of confined or trapped, in a sense, in this other realm. And so they are kind of confined behind the walls, in the attic, in the basement, and they are communicating from this other dimension. But if you ever hear a knock 3 times, or you hear knocking at 3 a.m., this is most likely something very negative. And one thing you must never do is knock back. I would not encourage that ever. This is a story about someone who did that such thing. Now, there was this guy named Greg. And Greg said one night he was sitting in his bedroom, and right behind his bed on the wall, he hears a knock 3 times. Boom, boom, boom. And he's kind of confused because he's like, there's literally nothing behind this wall. So what could be causing that knocking noise? Once again, he hears a knock. Boom, 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 3 times. And a 3rd time, he hears this knock. So he eventually, is just fed up at this point, and he's like, you know what? Boom, boom, boom. He knocks back 3 times. The knocking starts again, but it starts getting louder and louder, and now it sounds like something is almost trying to break through the wall. So Greg, right, gets up, and he says, just stop already. I'm trying to sleep. And it stops. He goes to bed, but then he's awoken in the middle of the night to banging again really loudly on the walls. And for like several nights in a row, right, he keeps hearing this banging on the walls. He checks right behind this wall outside. There is nothing that could be causing this sound. And, he can't sleep at night because all night long he's hearing this banging. Well, this one particular night, right, he goes to bed And he, like, all of a sudden wakes up, and he's sitting outside in his backyard, and he doesn't remember, like, how he got there and what, you know, like, what is he doing outside? And he never sleepwalks. He's never had any, like, incidents like that. So he gets up, he goes back inside, and when he goes into his bedroom, he hears the banging sounds again. So the next day, right, he goes and he talks to his friend, and his friend says, go to the Catholic Church and you go and speak with them and tell them what's happening. So he goes to the Catholic Church and he talks to this priest, and the priest gives him a crucifix and says, I want you to put this on your wall where you're hearing the knocking sound and say a couple prayers on this, like, piece of paper that he gives him. So Greg goes home, he puts the cross on the wall, and he says a couple prayers. And this works. He doesn't hear the knocking until about 6 months later, right? He's sleeping and he wakes up to just the banging sound on the wall, the knocking sound on the wall again. And this time it's really violent. And he realizes this cross has been knocked off the wall and fell onto the ground. So he hurries up and grabs this cross and puts it back up on the wall, and the knocking sound stopped.
I grew up in the Appalachian Mountains, and my Nana's house was very haunted and had a lot of strange things happen there. My brother and his girlfriend at the time were staying with her at her house, and my grandmother was not doing well. She wasn't in good health. So they spent the night there, and late at night, almost always everything happens late at night in Appalachia. They start hearing my grandmother walking around the house saying, Amanda, Amanda. My brother's girlfriend's name was not Amanda. It was Miranda. And she's walking around, my grandmother walking around, who's not well, in the middle of the night in the dark, saying, Amanda. Y'all, I have chills thinking about this, and I wasn't even there that night. And then someone commented on one of my videos and said, how do you know it was your grandmother saying these things? And that took me back, because I don't. And mimics are a thing in the Appalachian Mountains. It makes more sense that whatever was walking around saying Amanda, that sounded like my grandmother, wasn't my grandmother, because they sounded like it was coming from the basement too. They were upstairs. Her bedroom was upstairs, and the basement, you had to go down 2 flights of stairs. My grandmother wasn't well enough to do it. I don't remember the last time she went down there, but Amanda coming from the basement at 3 a.m. in Appalachia in a dark 2-story house in the woods. I would never go down there. And they didn't leave the room to check on it. Thank God they didn't leave the room, because I don't think that was my grandmother. What do you think? Do you think it was my grandmother?
I need to tell you guys this ghost story. I've gone back and forth for years about whether I should ever talk about this, but I still think about it more often than I'd like to admit. And honestly, I'm curious if anyone else who's lived in an old Victorian house has experienced anything similar. A few years ago, I lived in a Victorian terrace townhouse for just under 2 years. It was one of those houses built directly into the side of a hill, so the layout was strange, to say the least. To paint a picture, at street level, you had the front door and 2 bedrooms. Those belonged to my 2 boys. If you went up a level, there were 2 more bedrooms, mine and my youngest daughter's. She was only about 2 or 3 at the time. And then below street level was what we used as the main living space. The kitchen, living room, and a conservatory that opened out to the back. From the very beginning, the house just felt wrong. Not in a dramatic way, not like something obvious was happening. It just felt heavy, like the air itself had weight to it. No matter how much I cleaned or decorated, the place never felt warm or comfortable, especially at night. I was living there alone with my kids most of the time. I had split up with my ex-husband while we were still in that house, so it was usually just me and them. At first, it was little things, easy to dismiss. I'd hear whispering, but never loud enough to make out words. I'd walk into a room and think I'd seen someone standing there, only for whatever it was to disappear the second I focused on it. And there was this constant feeling of being watched, like you were never fully alone, even when the house was quiet and everyone was asleep. I told myself it was stress, or grief, or exhaustion from raising the kids alone. Anything. I didn't want to scare myself, or worse, scare them, so I tried to brush it off. And I was able to, up until one night when something happened that I just still can't explain. My eldest son was around 8 or 9 at the time, and he decided he wanted to start a YouTube channel. He'd film random videos in his bedroom, Silly stuff, talking to the camera, showing toys, and I always check them before he uploaded anything. His bedroom was located at the very front of the house. His bed was pushed up against the wall beneath the window, and we kept the curtains closed all the time for privacy. They were thick, dark curtains, heavy fabric, and they met right in the middle. One afternoon, I was watching one of his videos back when something caught my attention. There was a moment where the footage slowed just enough that I noticed movement behind him, something near the window. I rewound the video, and then I rewound it again, slower this time, and then I went through it frame by frame. That's when I saw it. From the narrow gap where the two curtains met, something appeared to push through. It looked like an arm, not a shadow, not a trick of light, an actual arm with a hand reaching out towards the pillow end of my son's bed. I remember my stomach dropping when I saw it. The window itself was raised above street level. You had to walk up steps just to reach the front door, so there was no way someone outside could have cast a silhouette like that through the curtains. And the curtains weren't moving. It wasn't fabric shifting. It wasn't a blur. It looked deliberate. Something was reaching in. I took screenshots immediately and sent them to my sister along with the video. I didn't tell her what I thought it was. I just asked her what she saw. She responded almost instantly. She described the exact same thing. Years have passed since then, and I no longer have that phone, and the video is gone. My son thinks he deleted it all at some point, but that moment changed everything for me. Because for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just imagining things anymore. The house had been trying to tell me something all along, and that wasn't even the worst thing that had happened there.
Tituba is easily one of the most well-known figures in American history, often thought to be the reason that witchcraft was brought into the wholesome Puritan colony at Salem Village. Tituba gets a lot of blame for the chaos that followed during the Salem witch trials, one of America's darkest moments for a number of different reasons. And earlier this year, I had the opportunity to go and visit Salem and learn more about Tituba as the person, and not just the reason for the Salem witch trials. And unfortunately, through that trip, I realized that I held a lot of false information about Tituba, and there are still a lot of misconceptions about her. But it is my goal to bring more clarity to her today. But before I get into it, it's Black Witch Month, where for as many days as I can in the month of February, I talk about a black witch, and today I'm talking about the oh-so-famous Tituba. So one of the biggest misconceptions about Tituba is her age. A lot of people have her set as a middle-aged woman, think 30 or 40. Now, to be fair, it was the 1600s, so people were not living that long, but in truth, she wasn't much older than Abigail Williams. However, adultification seems to be something that is pervasive in the US, and Tituba was treated as much older than she actually was. She should have known better, and so she took a lot of blame that she shouldn't have, and obviously as an enslaved woman, a black woman, she wasn't given the grace of mistakes or misconceptions. And one of the most unique things that I learned in my visit to Salem was how the use of witchcraft to fight witchcraft wasn't necessarily uncommon. You see it in the Malleus Maleficarum, a compilation of ways to kill witches so that you can rid your colonies of them. But I'm sure if you were to open that book, you would see that it reads just like a spell book. In addition to this, there were other remedies that you could use to identify witches, such as the use of a pea cake. Now, depending on the story that you hear, and they do vary, again, historical accounts, especially back then, are biased. They might not tell the whole story. The whole story could be chopped and screwed to fit certain narratives, but you could use remedies to identify certain witches. And so in Tituba's case, as a woman who came from Barbados, or was said to have come from Barbados, an Arawak woman, which at the time was a Spanish colony, it wasn't unusual to use magic to fight magic. Now, like I mentioned, depending on the story you're hearing, it could be suggested that Mary Sibley was the one who came up with the solution or the remedy needed to identify the witches in the colony at that time. Other stories have it as Tituba being the one to suggest the use of a pea cake. Now, it doesn't matter which story you listen to, the premise is basically the same. What you'll do is take the urine of the afflicted, whoever that might be, and you're going to bake it into a cake. And then you're going to take this cake and feed it to your nearest house pet. In this case, it was a dog, and the dog would go nuts. He would identify the witch, and you've got your culprit, the reason behind the chaos happening. Now, in Tituba's case, suggesting this would have definitely resulted in a catch-22. On one hand, you could attempt to save this family that you are enslaved by from these afflictions. On the other hand, it might reveal you to be a witch. Now, I don't think she was really considering the latter like she was the former, and it said that she deeply cared about her wards. It should also be said that it wasn't uncommon to use folk magics in the colonies during this time. Party tricks, using apple cores to identify your loved ones. I actually think we see a good example of this in the TV show Charmed when Phoebe goes back to the 1600s anyways, but it wasn't uncommon for folk magic to be in the colonies. But The level of use would determine whether or not you were an outsider, a social pariah, and you needed to stay on the outskirts, or if this was a generally accepted yet frowned upon activity. So the idea that Tituba would use this knowledge of magic that she took with her from Barbados when she was stolen from there isn't completely unfathomable. In the area of the world she was from before she was whisked away to cold New England, this was a common practice. Using witchcraft to fight witchcraft wasn't unheard of. In fact, it was embedded into the culture. So obviously, having somebody who is the steward of these young girls and watching them suffer is something she would want to prevent to the best of her ability. So the idea that she had these tools in her toolkit and could use them to fight off this evil force is something that she would have done willingly. So despite her good intentions to try to help relieve these afflictions, Tituba was still an outsider in a very xenophobic period of time in a very xenophobic community. So she was an easy target, and obviously this enslaved young black woman would bring her magics and corrupt the souls of Salem. But there was also a lot of political gain to be had by doing this. So while there were other targets in Salem at the time, Tituba was by far one of the easiest ones. This is a woman who was close to the family. This is a woman who was obviously foreign. She used her crude magics to corrupt our girls, and so it was easy to rally against Tituba. And because she had no legal counsel, because she was an outsider, because she was enslaved, because she was a woman, a young woman at that, there was nothing that was going to work to her benefit. And unfortunately, at the end of it all, Tituba was forced into a confession for a crime she never committed and was sold off. But I want to know your thoughts in the comments. What did you think about Tituba? Did you know this? Drop your thoughts below.